Up next is the drought in California, created by geoengineering. Dane Wigington joins us. We'll find out. Well, they say in California, we are in the worst drought in 1,000 years. My gosh. But what's causing it? Well, one person believes it's geoengineering, and we'll be talking with Dane Wigington next on Coast to Coast AM. Throughout the United States, you may have seen some strange billboards about geoengineering, things that say like skies poisoned by your government. Brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org. Well, the person responsible for that is our guest, Dane Wigington. He has a background in solar energy. He's a former employee of Bechtel Power Corporation. He's been engaged in constant climate geoengineering research for more than a decade. His personal residence was featured in a cover article on the world's largest renewable energy magazine. It's called Home Power. He is a lead researcher for the geoengineeringwatch.org website I just mentioned and has investigated all levels of geoengineering, from stratospheric aerosol geoengineering to, of course, HAARP up there in Alaska. Dane, welcome back to Coast.
Hello, George. Thanks for continuing to try to wake people up to the biggest elephant in the room. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't yet grasp the gravity of what's unfolding around us.
No, they really don't. This audience is picking it up in a big way, but I think outside of it, they probably don't.
It's growing now, and again, the notion that weather modification and climate modification isn't going on is a notion that's built simply from a total lack of any objective investigation. When we have documents from going back decades outlining U.S. government documents outlining the scope and scale of the weather modification programs going back to the 50s and 60s, budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and these are posted at geoengineeringwatch.org. Some are 150 pages long. People are simply not investigating. They believe the knee-jerk conspiracy theorist trained response on a lot of issues, and this one included, and it's truly beyond belief that things could be this visible in the skies above our heads, and people are still in denial.
Dane, we've got posted at coasttocoastam.com some of your illustrations on billboards of anti-geoengineering. How many do you have up, and where are they?
First, I want to say it's definitely a team effort on the billboards. There's a lot of people helping our effort, and I certainly don't want to take all the credit for that at all. It's a lot of concerted and helpful activists are assisting with that. But they've been in a number of spots in the country, Nevada, New Mexico, Atlanta. They're in a number of locations. But the bottom line is, and all we've ever tried to do, George, is to get people to actually investigate and not have the knee-jerk, total denialist response until the last possible hour. And in regard to the California scenario, again, there's a lot of things affecting the climate, a lot of anthropogenic causes, which a lot of people even in the anti-geoengineering community don't want to admit to. There's a lot of problems. We've done a lot of damage to the planet. But certain aspects of that, like the California drought, can be very directly connected to climate engineering.
Something somewhere, Dane, got you into this and into it in a big way. How did that happen?
Well, I've said a lot of times, George, this is the last thing I ever wanted to spend 12 years of my life completely devoted to, 70, 80 hours a week. But I've told this story before, but I mean, it's how I got into this. I moved to the Pacific Northwest hoping to find clean weather or clean air because I grew up in smoggy Southern California. When I began to lose massive amounts of my solar uptake from whatever these aircraft were emitting, huge amounts, 70, 80% on some days, clearly something was wrong. These patterns were intermittent, atmospheric conditions the same, and when I began to research geoengineering, solar radiation management, I was astounded how much data there was from every scientific institution on the planet that I hadn't been familiar with yet, even with my background. And I started to test the precipitation. If there's metals in your precipitation, George, it's in your air column, and that means you're breathing it. I didn't want to find these metals, but I did. And I continued testing at the state-certified lab, and the amounts of these metals, aluminum, barium, all named in climate engineering patents, kept going through the roof, astronomical levels, completely toxic rain, tests as high as 3,450 parts per billion of aluminum. That's highly toxic.
Jeez.
So had no choice, George, no choice.
No, and for the future of our kids, we have no choice.
For us, too. It's that immediate. And this is where a lot of people are still well-trained under the impression that this is some linear equation that you can look backward and say, well, it took this long to reach this point, so therefore it's going to take the same amount of period to reach another point that's a degree worse. Not true. This equation is totally nonlinear. Our biosphere is imploding right now, and there's a lot of causes. Again, too many people want to blame everything on climate engineering. That's a mistake. Again, we've cut down forests around the globe, we've paved the planet, we've poisoned the oceans. I mean, there's not much we haven't done to the planet. That being said, the single greatest assault mathematically and the most all-encompassing, really based on available data, is climate engineering.
Give us and paint us a picture of a pilot, where he fuels, where he takes off, how he starts spraying. Just kind of tell us what you think is going on.
Well, first, if I could, for your listeners to understand why this would be going on, is this is the climate science community's proposed attempt to slow a runaway greenhouse event, a global warming event. Mm-hmm. But this, like a pharmaceutical cure again for the body, does far more harm than any perceived good. When you block some of the sun's incoming thermal radiation, you also trap that radiation. You shred the ozone layer. You totally disrupt the hydrological cycle. This is all documented in every single science institution study on geoengineering. So, again, that's one aspect. We also have weather warfare, George, which has been going on and documented historically for decades. So we have a lot of various layers to the onion that's going on here in this equation, just so your listeners understand. And I hope they research geoengineering, solar radiation management, and they'll understand the sort of mentality behind playing God with the weather. As far as pilots go, we certainly believe military pilots are involved. We know we have military tankers involved, and they can't be pilotless drones. I mean, they have the technology, but we do believe there's pilots in these aircraft, at least the military pilots in the tankers. I spoke to a KC-135 pilot face-to-face that didn't know what he was doing up there, in his words, and when he went back and asked questions, the last word I got, he was medicated behind a desk. So this is a don't-talk scenario, apparently.
Well, this has been going on for a number of years. People have been witnessing these things, but people think, other people who don't believe this think they're crazy.
Well, again, you're talking about people who have not done any investigation, that for whatever reason, whether it's ideology or simply denial, they have not investigated at all. So when we look at, for example, the kind of documents I mentioned, here's an excerpt from one that's 149 pages long, posted on geoengineeringwatch.org. It's titled Weather and Climate. This is a government document, by the way, 1965, Weather and Climate Modification from the National Science Foundation. Just a few excerpts from the table of contents: biological implications, social effects, legal implications, fiscal and organizational considerations. These are all, part of the 149 pages. Progress and prospects in climate modification, biological aspects of weather modification, consequences. I mean, it's there. It's there. Another 80-page document, presidential document from the Federal Council for Science and Technology to the Executive Office of the President, 1966 document, recommended program in climate modification. Budgets in the $100 million plus even then. And, George, what about those involved? People ask this all the time. Who's involved and what proof do we have? Here we have a presidential document. Here's some of the institutions involved. Universities, MIT, Colorado State University, University of Chicago, Duke University, University of Minnesota, Johns Hopkins, University of Illinois. What about federal agencies? How about, and they're listed on the document, by the way, I'm not making this up, DOD, DOE, which is Department of Energy for those who don't know, and Department of Defense, Department of State, Department of Health, Department of Interior, Bureau of Reclamation, NASA, Federal Aviation Administration, Department of Agriculture, Department of Forestry, Department of Commerce, National Science Foundation, Atomic Energy Commission, the list goes on.
Why aren't we getting pilots, Dane, to come forward and admit what's going on? I can't find them.
Well, that shouldn't be a hard one to answer, in that, one, let's take the Obama administration, who's prosecuted more whistleblowers than all other administrations combined.
Scared the heck out of them.
Let's take the whistleblower for the torture issue, George, John Kiriakou, who was the only person to go to jail for this country's engagement in torture. The only one to go to jail was the whistleblower. Same with financial issues. And when we consider, for example, let's look at John Wheeler, a former Bush aide, that reportedly was seen outside the Pentagon in 2011, I believe, that was reported as saying he was going to blow the whistle on these programs. He was found in a landfill 2 days later. So this is the sort of scenario we face, and it's not like our whole military knows this is going on. I was contacted about 90 days ago by a retired Air Force general, and that's the kind of call you certainly want to get.
Those are the big ones.
They are, and I've been communicating with him ever since. Been communicating with an Army Major General as well. They didn't know, and he's frantically working to raise awareness in his ranks. This is compartmentalized, of course, and we have a lot of great people in the U.S. military. We really do, but they need to wake up fast, and it's not okay just looking the other way or not investigating. They took an oath to their countrymen, and they need to fulfill that oath against all enemies, foreign and domestic. What's
China doing with regards to this, Dane? Because I always remember during the Olympics several years ago, they said, don't worry about the weather, we control that.
It's interesting you bring that up, and that's a great point. How many people heard that? And yet when you bring up weather or climate modification as if this is some foreign subject to them, they all saw that in the headlines. Russia, same thing. Russia said that they were going to reduce or eliminate snow over Moscow. This technology's been there at a very high level since the late 40s. So, yes, George, we have global, on this issue, we certainly and arguably have global collusion, collaboration, even between competing powers. And interestingly enough, these documents I brought up to you earlier, which people can review at geoengineeringwatch.org in our documents section, even that is discussed, of course, the need to have global cooperation, because you can't keep these sorts of programs within your own boundaries. And we know we have weather warfare going on anyway. Let's look at the sub-Saharan African countries that have been droughted into oblivion for decades, and then they allowed U.S. occupation afterwards. And how long has this been a weapon of war, a covert preferred weapon of war? And can this all be coincidence that every single country that the Western power structure wants to topple, like most recently the Middle Eastern countries, every single one subjected to record protracted drought, destabilizing society, and then the toppling occurs? Is that a coincidence? I don't think so.
There are no coincidences at all, Dane. So you talked earlier that the spraying was to prohibit emissions and other things that could affect the atmosphere. So was their original intent a good one?
No. It's an intent to, is it an honorable attempt to try to hide the severity of a problem? And again, it has nothing to do with emissions. It doesn't change emissions. It simply hides the problem. And if people would research what I'm saying, don't believe me, please, research it. And you'll see this is the stated goal of solar radiation management. Instead of curbing emissions, which nobody's doing, then the attempt is to try to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy,
right,
without any thought to the consequence of, it traps heat as well, and it has a list of negative effects that trigger cascading domino climate feedback mechanisms that's endless.
Wouldn't they have known that?
Well, it's interesting you bring that question up, too. You'd think so. I had a conversation with one of the architects of these programs from Oak Ridge Lab. That conversation I published it under Dialogue with the Geoengineering Insider. It was curious, alarming, I should say, as to just how oblivious he was of those consequences. And he had an attitude that basically indicated he was in a bubble, and that I think he made one statement that if Dane doesn't understand that if some trees need to die in California, I'll try to find this while we're on the phone here, but he said if trees need to die in California, then that's for the greater good. In fact, here it is. I just found it.
Okay.
This is a direct quote. This is from Jim Phelps. I kept his name silent for a while, but somebody else has released it from Oak Ridge Lab. He's definitely part of these programs. So California inherits more wildfires. This is his quote. And other problems in the rest of the U.S. nets cooler summer temps, less flooding, less serious storms. Well, they're not less serious now, are they? The weather in eastern Tennessee has been much cooler and the storms fewer. He's trying to prove his point that climate engineering is a good thing. I don't think anybody in the East thinks it's that good of a thing either when they're buried under engineered snowstorms like Boston was all year long.
Oh, my God, yeah.
And at the same time, California had no snow 14,000 feet up in the Sierras. He continues, like I told Dane on the phone, and this is, by the way, he's communicating with a congressional candidate who arranged this conversation. So he's communicating with him when he speaks to me in the third person. Like I told Dane on the phone, the larger models move toward larger balance equation in the entire U.S., and if they have to kill off many trees in California to lower damage factors across the expanse of the U.S., the trees there are going to take a hit. He gets to decide. They get to decide who gets water, who doesn't, who gets hammered with engineered snowstorms, who doesn't. And by the way, with engineered snowstorms, as you said earlier, George, if people look up Chinese scientists engineer snowstorms, they'll find mainstream media coverage. They openly announced they were doing it until they created $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing. This is all hard science.
Now, the drought in California, would you believe has been caused by the geoengineering? Was it done accidentally or by mistake? Surely they wouldn't want to wipe out a state, would they?
Well, first, one, as far as motive, none of us can really know or say definitively a motive. We really can't. We can put a lot of dots together and paint a picture that seems fairly clear, but we really can't say the motive. In regard to the cause, we can absolutely speak to the cause. And if anybody looks at my data going back years now, and what I said would happen has happened exactly, because it couldn't not happen. If they continue these programs, it couldn't not happen. If you run your car through the guardrail, you know you're going to go to the bottom of the canyon. There's no other alternative. So when we see on satellite imagery the blanket grid pattern aerosol spraying of the Eastern Pacific, which is the storm track for the western U.S., we know that effect. There's no guessing involved. There's no speculation. There's no hypothesizing. It breaks up the storm track. It over-aerosolizes the storms, which is too many condensation nuclei, CCNs, cloud condensation nuclei, and that diminishes that rainfall, and they can migrate it further on because there's too many particles in the air. And this is hard science. So as long as that activity increased or continued, which it has, this result had to happen.
It had to happen.
It had to
Can it be reversed, or is it too late?
Well, if you're talking about can the rainfall be...
Start.
Absolutely. I mean, when you quit hampering with the system, the planet is warming rapidly. And I know a lot of people still, for reasons that are hard to fathom, are still fighting about that issue. And if people could get over their disdain for Al Gore, which none of us like, or carbon credits, which is a scam, reality is still reality. If Al Gore says...
Well, regardless of how we got there.
Well, it matters, though.
Because I think we're in an Earth cycle, too.
I'm getting to a point. Well, again, George, mathematically, with all due respect, statisticians have done the statistical odds of this warming. We're not really engaged in climate change. We're engaged in a climate shift. What's happening now is exponentially faster than at any time in Earth's history. So the point I'm getting at, and back to the drought, is that statistically speaking, the chances of this cycle being natural, and statistics have been done, and they can be looked up online, it's a 1 above a 1 with 100 zeros behind it. The number doesn't even exist.
Mm-hmm.
So statistically, again, this is as natural as shooting someone in the back of the head 5 times and saying they died of a heart attack. We can't, no matter what else is happening in any sort of natural variance, when you affect the energy balance to this degree, of the planet, when you put something in the air, whether it's from a jet or from a smokestack, it doesn't just float out into space. It's contained here. And that alters Earth's energy balance. And that's a very simple equation that I hope people face soon because, again, climate engineering is making that worse, not better, as I explained earlier in the show. Their attempt to hide and create large-scale regional cool-downs, which they have done, especially over the eastern U.S., the most anomalously cool zone in the entire world for the last 2 years, it comes at the cost of a worsened overall warming. So back to the California drought and making it rain. On a warming planet, for every degree of warming, whatever one wants to consider the cause, for every degree of warming, C, centigrade, the atmosphere carries 7% more moisture. It must rain more on a warming planet unless there's a factor that's not being acknowledged. And that factor is an atmosphere full of geoengineering particulates.
Good point. We're going to come back in a moment. Dane Wigington with us, his website, geoengineeringwatch.org. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Coast. Dane Wigington is with us, and of course, his website, geoengineeringwatch.org. This is growing, though, Dane, isn't it?
The awareness?
Yes.
Exponentially. And, it's just to back up on your question, can the rain be turned on? And I want to put one thing into perspective that gives a quantity on the effect that we've had on the planet since the dawn of civilization, if you will. We now have recent statistics that indicate we've lost 3.4 trillion trees since that time. 3.4 trillion. That's 55%, over half of Earth's trees. So I just want to point out that there is huge impacts going on, and a lot of those trees, in fact, the majority lost in the last 100 years, the majority of that in the last 50. Geoengineering has been going on all that time because the planet does try to respond, George. When there's changes happening to the planet and CO2 goes up, rain goes up, the rain's more acidic, the forests would normally be stimulated, if not for what? Climate engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Climate engineering is killing our forest, so the planet can't respond. How is it killing our forest? The rain is full of bioavailable metals, which horribly affects soils and root systems. We have peer-reviewed study on that. We have massively disrupted hydrological cycle because the particulates in the atmosphere, as I explained, again, this is causing disruptions around the globe. We have an incredibly intense UV radiation level, and by the way, the Canadian government is trying to suppress their scientists from speaking to the media about a northern hemisphere, not southern, northern hemisphere ozone hole that has, in the recent past, been as large as the southern hemisphere hole. Have you heard of that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, good, because a lot of people haven't. So that burns the trees from the top down, and then we have the foliage with all the fires, for example. We have, in addition to everything I just said, the foliage of the trees is covered with what amounts to an incendiary dust. These metals are incendiaries. Now we have more dry lightning because of the lack of rain, which I mentioned, and we have more lightning because the atmosphere is more conductive. Everything has to go up in an inferno. So, again, the planet can't respond. Back to geoengineering, and even if we ignore all other sources of human damage, if we ignore every other source, I think you and I would, and anybody else would agree, geoengineering is human-caused, and that's causing huge problems. So we have to point a finger at this one, and the devastation that's being caused right now, George, and there's certain factors that can't be denied. For example, one of the goals of the climate engineers, according to this insider that I spoke to and a lot of the climate data, they're trying to keep the atmospheric relative humidity from climbing because, as you know, water vapor is also a greenhouse gas. But
just adds to it, doesn't it?
Yes, but by stopping it raining, it's a very narrow-minded approach because, again, they're stopping the rain, they're stopping the Earth's natural response systems. So we've seen atmospheric relative humidity decline since the late 40s, when we know these programs ramped up, and that can't happen on a warming planet, as I mentioned earlier, because the atmosphere carries more moisture. It can't happen without geoengineering, without the particulates that are desiccants in the atmosphere.
In some areas, Dane, like the Midwest, they've had record amounts of rain over the summer where it just seemed to come down in buckets and buckets and buckets.
Great question.
What's happening there?
Again, because the atmosphere carries more moisture, you're going to get more deluges also. You can't uniformly blanket spray the planet. Can't be done. Not enough resources to do that. So although the humidities are decreased in an overall context, that does not mean that deluges don't increase. Deluges do increase because the atmosphere, again, carries more moisture. So let's look at how much they can control that. You saw Hurricane Joaquin. Joaquin is starting to spin up. You probably saw that, George?
Yep, sure did. Had it on the show tonight.
So if we look at that, and we look at the record warm ocean temperatures in some areas in the Gulf in the 90s in places earlier. Why has there been a 10-year, 119-month major hurricane landfall drought for the U.S.? 119 months, all-time record hurricane drought hitting the U.S. And Hurricane Sandy was not a major hurricane, by the way, for those who think that I'm mistaken on this. I challenge anybody to look at what I just said because it's covered in numerous scientific journals. 19-month drought while there's record cyclone activity in the Western Pacific. Why not here? Because they're suppressing those cyclonic rotations. That's how much power they have. We have patents for this, by the way, and this is also done with aerosols. It affects convection. So people should scratch their heads a little bit. Why has there been no major landfalls? Now, there may be one again right now, and that may be like Sandy appeared to be some sort of a demonstration of their power because, George, you remember, Sandy, they knew 7 days ahead of time that Sandy was going to make a 90-degree, unprecedented westerly turn.
Right.
Remember that?
It was as if somebody steered it.
Exactly. And how could they possibly have known that far ahead of time? Was that not a demonstration of their power? Let's take a couple more demonstrations. At the Cancun Climate Conference and the Copenhagen Climate Conferences in the previous few years, both those conferences had record low temperatures at the conference, at the time of the conference, in spite of record warm or above normal temperatures in all the surrounding areas. What are the mathematical odds of that? And when we know we have chemical ice nucleating agents that create a dense layer of air that settles to the ground and drops the mercury on the ground, drops the temperatures on the ground, we have patents for this. We have Chinese scientists openly announcing they're doing it. Why in the world would we think it's not going on there? Why would you anomalously have record cold temperatures at each of these conferences with warmer than normal in the surrounding areas? Why would you have a 10-year hurricane drought? And now we look at weather trading derivatives. How many of those coastal cities are paying extortion fees for weather trading or weather insurance through weather trading derivatives? It's a gambling
That's a
casino.
Good point. Good point.
It's all connected. It's all connected, and there's more to it than that. And if I could, another quote, direct quote from this insider I mentioned. He says, "I don't blame Dane." Again, he's speaking to this congressional candidate. "I don't blame Dane for complaining for what is happening to his backyard, as I would be up in arms also. Which is why they being the government, they just need to tell the people what is going on with climate change moderation methods and all decide on what measures are fair to all, yet serious enough to control the methane boil-off risks," which shows right there, here's an insider, what he's told, what he's concerned about, the methane issue, and he's right to be concerned about that. But it gives an inside view to someone in these programs. This is their mentality, that they have the right to play God with the weather.
People are suffering, Dane, all kinds of respiratory illnesses these days, coughs that just don't seem to go away. I'm convinced this is tied into that.
It can't not be. It can't not be. When we have the tests to prove, we have 70 lab tests in Northern California, we have lab tests from around the globe proving these materials are in our air column. We have people, especially on the West Coast, they leap at China. It's all coming from China. That's not true. We have California Air Resources Board studies on the aerosols from China. These metals cannot stay suspended in the air that long. They can't migrate across oceans. Not aluminum, not barium. Mercury can, because it converts to a gaseous state. These metals are of local origin, and so much of this metal has fallen on us, George, in the last 10 years that,
oh my God,
according to U.S. Forest Service biologists, which I communicate with, we've done soils pH testing. I've been in the field with USDA scientists myself doing the same testing. Soil pH values have changed 10 to 12 times toward alkaline in 10 years. Do you know how much metal, how much aluminum oxide it takes to change soil pHs that much? And we're breathing
lots.
A lot.
Lots. Are there any areas in the country that are immune to this or that haven't been affected?
Let's look at a couple studies again, because I don't want to give opinion to anybody. I want to give studies.
Hard facts.
So let's take the bee colony collapse disorder. We've been communicating with the bee people, I have, for several years, trying to explain to them there must be a bigger issue. There is a bigger issue, and that issue is geoengineering fallout, heavy metals, specifically aluminum contamination. And they want to focus simply on the farm chemicals, which are bad, but when we have bees dying 1,000 miles into the wilderness, there has to be another element. We now have peer-reviewed study, and any of your listeners can, and I hope will, look this up. Just search bees/aluminum. The bees are dying from massive aluminum contamination. They're exhibiting symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia. They have so much aluminum in them, up to 200 parts per million. It's about 70 times what it takes to cause Alzheimer's or dementia in a human brain. No wonder they're dead. We have whales from around the globe, 1,000 whales from the most remote places on the planet. Peer-reviewed study showed the whales contained, quote, jaw-dropping levels of aluminum. No place to hide, George.
And a lot of these sea animals are beaching themselves. What's causing that?
Well, again, there's a lot of complexity to all these issues. Of course, along the West Coast, a lot of people point only at Fukushima. And Fukushima is a big problem.
It is a problem.
It is a problem. But when we have these massive fish kills, for example, where they all float belly up, radiation does not have that kind of immediate effect at this distance. That is indicative of seabed gassing of methane and hydrogen sulfide, which deoxygenates the water and immediately kills vast numbers of fish. It creates anoxic and hypoxic zones, low oxygen, no oxygen zones. So you have that going on, the food chain breaking down. As I mentioned earlier, you have massive ozone destruction, most directly related to climate engineering. So we have plankton being wiped out because of the extensive UV, or the excessive UV. We have global plankton stocks down now 50% or more. Plankton produces 50% of Earth's oxygen content. You'd think we'd see a headline somewhere about that, wouldn't you? So we have a lot of various issues affecting the total breakdown of the food chain. And one more big one, George, that never gets mentioned. Another form of geoengineering is called ocean fertilization. And we believe that the spraying they do of the ocean for marine cloud enhancement, that's the patent title and that's the process, those particulates are likely, because we have peer-reviewed study on the suggested use of them for ocean iron fertilization. So they use them for solar radiation management. When they fall to the sea surface, they become ocean iron fertilization, the attempt to get the ocean to absorb some of the excess CO2 in order to take it out of the atmosphere.
And they're killing the ocean while they do it then.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Exactly.
Fish populations are dwindling. Everything's coral reefs are getting smaller.
They're not dwindling, they're crashing. Global pelagic fish populations are down 90%. 90.
And it's not from overfishing.
That's a part of it. Again, it's a part of it. We all need to not think dichotomously, because all of these equations are multifaceted, a lot of factors, and they're all contributing. But when we have one single issue that affects virtually all of the web of life, all of it, that's a complete runaway train of atmospheric experimentation and insanity, and even including the radio frequency transmissions now, which we can get at when you want, there is nothing left unscathed from these programs. Nothing.
Where is science when it comes to this? Where are these scientists and these experts? How come they're not saying anything?
Oh, that's a really good question as well. I just got CBS News coverage. Not sure if you might have caught that or not.
I did.
So if you saw that the scientist they put on there from UC, he was from UC Berkeley or somewhere there, and he stated, he clearly wasn't ready for his questions, but he stated that the notion that geoengineering could be going on would be comparable to suggesting aliens had landed or something like this.
Which we think happened too.
Well, aside from the point, though, for him to make that comparison, when we have mountains of science data on geoengineering, we have recent congressional global governance documents, we have 150 patents, we have film footage of these tankers spraying at altitude. By the way, any of your listeners can look at that on geoengineeringwatch.org. We have film footage of KC-10s, KC-135, C-17s, AWACS, spraying at altitude, turning on and off, nozzles visible in some cases. We're not guessing. So these people are paid, George, from the time they enter school. They are paid and programmed, and they know where their paycheck's coming from, and they will say literally whatever they're told to say. And what a shining example we have of that with 9/11, don't we? When we have NIST, the National Institute of Science and Technology, feeding us a story that architects and engineers from around the globe make clear is impossible. For example, Building 7, and not to diverge from the subject, but simply stating the same kind of scientists have told us that Building 7, a 47-structure steel high-rise building, collapsed in free-fall speed from some couches and chairs burning on the first floor. And we have the same scientists the same type of scientists, I should say, in academia, telling the first responders that it was safe to go back into the 9/11 site when they knew it was anything but. Correct?
Correct.
So that's the kind of academia we have.
Can this be stopped? I mean, if they said today, we're done, we're not spraying, would the planet reconstruct itself?
Not in any time frame that matters. And that's a mathematical fact. So when you say that to someone, they wonder, well, why are you fighting this battle then if it doesn't matter? It does matter. we can perhaps still save some of the planet's ability to support life. And that's what we're fighting for. So as far as can it stop, I think the only way it can stop is from the inside out, which means we raise critical mass of awareness to the point where every military family knows what their family is involved with, what their family member who's in the military is involved with. And when I get contact from the kind of people I mentioned earlier, the Air Force generals and so forth, we're making that sort of progress because you have scientists like this one from Oak Ridge Lab, which I've quoted a number of times. That's who's running the show. That's who's giving advice to the military. The same kind of people, George, who detonated nuclear weapons without understanding at all what the consequences were and kept detonating them and until they detonated over 2,000, contaminated everything on Earth. Let's look at another example, George, nuclear power.
Yeah.
You know as well as I that Fukushima may kill us all.
It could.
It could. No end in sight, no technology to fix it, and they're building 60 more right now.
That's right. And many of them on earthquake fault lines.
Yep.
Which is crazy.
Exactly.
Just
so
insane.
People need to rethink their philosophy on the quote-unquote experts because that's simply a form of control. And the same with the agencies that people imagine are there to tell them. People assume that somebody somewhere would tell them if something was wrong. Couldn't be further from the truth. These agencies like EPA and Cal Air Quality Resources Board, a lot of these other agencies, they're there to hide issues, not to disclose them. Why did California water quality testing stop testing for aluminum in 2002? Because their job is to hide the issue, not to disclose it. And the people within these agencies, how they rationalize their behavior, I don't know. I've met with some high-level EPA people in Sacramento in the past. I've been with Gavin Newsom, as I've mentioned before, in his office. I've been in Barbara Boxer's office, and these people all just simply rationalize their behavior. But the fact is, the system is designed not to show what's happening. Just like, George, and you know this as well, after Fukushima, what did they do to the, quote, safe radiation levels? They raised them 10,000%.
Make it sound right.
Yep.
With everything that's been happening, this has been going on for a long, long time. Do you think that some of these pilots have rejected doing this, and maybe they've been fired, but they still didn't say anything?
Oh, I certainly think there would have to be some with a conscience. There must be some humanity.
There's got to be one or two.
There must be some humanity left with that. Now, I had communication through another Air Force member, from an Air Force member through another Air Force member, who was a part of the operational mechanism maintenance for the aerosol spraying mechanisms. And he communicates in a cat and mouse manner with this other Air Force person who then communicates to me. And he won't say anything directly, he nods. And he signed a disclosure, a non-disclosure agreement that had a provision for lethal enforcement. What does that mean? You talk, you die. This is what our military is doing.
You talk, you die.
So let's look at the ship.
Hold on for a second, Dane. We're at the top of the hour, but we're going to come back. We'll talk more, and we'll take some phone calls, too. Questions, or if you want to talk about the spraying of your skies wherever you live, check in with us. Okay, get ready this hour with Dane Wigington. We're going to take your phone calls, continue chatting with them as well. Perhaps you can share stories, what's happening in your area as we talk about spraying geoengineering. That's what it's all about. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you along with Dane Wigington as we talk about geoengineering. Dane, is there a coordination worldwide for this, for the spraying and for whatever they're doing from country to country? Are they all in cahoots with each other?
On this issue, yes. Now, that doesn't mean the satellite countries, they're forced to comply. And we see examples of countries that seem to want to push back. Ireland was one. They were financially crushed. In Mexico, there seemed to be pushback, and the spraying seemed to secede a bit before the swine flu outbreak there. It commenced again immediately after, was at a shot across their bow.
Huh.
So countries seem to be forced to comply, but we found photographs of the Soviet weather modification scientists touring the U.S. weather modification facilities in 1968 at the height of the Cold War. And again, these documents, these long government documents I spoke about, George, repeatedly address the issue of the need for global collaboration between countries. And again, we all have them openly announcing they're doing this at other levels, and they simply, you can't keep this between your borders. So that collaboration is there. And to shed one last little bit of insight as to the why question, because so many people can't get past the why. Why would they do this? And if I could, again, add one more little excerpt from Jim Phelps, the Oak Ridge scientist I spoke about earlier. He was involved with what's called atmospheric pharmacology. If that term doesn't scare your listeners, it should, because this is their mentality, that they have the right, and this is what this term means, to add chemicals to the atmosphere in the attempt to synergistically offset existing chemicals that are already there and deemed harmful. What does that mean? It means let's fight fire with a bucket of gas, adding one layer of insanity on top of another. That's what air pharmacology is. So here's a final quote from Jim Phelps to me. He is clearly convinced he has the right to do this in the atmosphere, even if we have to breathe it. He says to this congressional candidate, he says, tell Dane to advocate for the turning off of all these climate mediation systems if he takes responsibility for the looming disaster that will kill off 3/4 of the population of the world. So clearly he thinks that climate engineering is doing some sort of good and not horrific harm. And he finishes with this. He, meaning Dane, wants nature to correct for these man-made problems due to ozone, and it will take hundreds of years. In the meantime, the methane hydrate issue, and that's a big one that everybody needs to be concerned about in reality, can make for a much hotter world. So, again, back to their concept, they have the right to practice air pharmacology, dumping chemicals in the atmosphere to try to offset the ones that are already there, and to try to combat issues like the mass methane expulsion happening in the Arctic right now, which may kill us all also very soon, faster than Fukushima if it continues. And geoengineering is making that worse, not better. So what a surprise. When you play God with the weather, just like taking pharmaceuticals in the human body, here's the list of consequences that you hear on the commercials after, they tell you the new drug that you're supposed to take, and then the lawyer's the next commercial, right? So this is the same mentality.
When people try to tell other people about the spraying in the atmosphere, aren't they looked at as if they're nuts?
They're trained to. Aren't they trained to? When they hear the term conspiracy theory, aren't they trained to behave in that manner?
Yep.
And what's the official 9/11 story? What is the official government 9/11 story? A textbook conspiracy. But does anybody react that way? No, because they're trained not to. That's the official government conspiracy theory story, so it's okay then. But when even though we have film footage of the crime happening, even though we have the materials falling on the ground, we have massive lists of patents, we have government documents, we have the leaders of countries. We have the leaders of countries on the floor of the UN stating their countries are being droughted out by UN weather modification programs like the leaders of Iran. And yet we have people who are just trained to react. It's something that's fearful to them, something they don't want to believe, to just bury their head in the sand. But I can assure you, George, those heads are going to get ripped out of the sand soon. Yeah. I don't care whether people believe me or not. I don't want them to. I'm asking them to look and to investigate. If they give a damn about their children, if they give a damn about their children's futures, geoengineering is not going to go away. And we're all knee-deep in water on the deck of the Titanic right now. Our situation is immediate. And that's not the only problem we have, but it's the biggest and the most immediate. How long can you hold your breath? Every one of us is sucking this material in, and it's affecting our cognitive ability, our health, our respiratory function. Nothing it's not affecting negatively.
Well, cancer's at an all-time high. Who's to say it's not because of some of this?
Well, it can't not be connected. Again, I'm not saying there's a lot of things out there that are causing health issues and cancers, and I'm not taking away from that. I'm just simply saying this is the biggest. When we have whale studies, bee studies, human respiratory studies, we have MIT, one of the most renowned and respected research institutions on the planet, telling us on the current trajectory, in less than 10 years, 1 out of 2 children will have autism. 1 out of 2 from MIT.
Huge. It's not and it's not just vaccines, is it?
No, it's not just vaccines. But again, back to synergistic toxicity. Vaccines contain mercury. We're breathing in aluminum, and inhaled aluminum, by the way, is far more harmful than ingested aluminum, far more harmful, especially the particle size we're talking about. These particles can easily penetrate the blood-brain barrier. They go right into the bloodstream, through the lungs.
They do.
So in the case of mercury and aluminum, which we all have both in us now, the combination of those two metals can increase overall toxicity by as much as 10,000%. It's a very, very lethal mix, and that's from peer-reviewed study, by the way. So, again, George, the walls are closing in, and now we look at the fact that we're all more electrically conductive. We're all being exposed to massive radio frequency transmissions from a lot of sources, including the ionosphere heaters around the globe, which are massively powerful, bombarding the planet with radio frequencies, and the fact that we're all more electrically conductive, even more harmful for us.
Are you ready for some calls?
Anytime you are.
Okay, let's pick it up by going to Karen in Doyle, California to get things started. Hi, Karen.
Hi, George. How are you?
I'm fine. I hope you are too. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm pretty good. I got some points here. I'll make them quick as possible.
Sure.
First of all, Melody sent you some chemtrail pictures about 12:25 on your Twitter account.
Okay.
And you'll see them. And we live in a real rural area. Sometimes in the wintertime, when it's supposed to rain, the clouds, come over. They chemtrail. It quits raining. One day, I went outside after they had been spraying. I stood there. The wind was blowing from the west toward us. 5 minutes later, when I came in the house, I had this big clunk in my throat. That it was just a gob of stuff. Didn't feel good for about 3 or 4 days.
Jeez.
I took a whole bunch of vitamins and kicked it out of there. Let's see what else I got here. And they've been spraying the heck out of us for the last 3 days. Big X's across where we live. And I'm the one that lives like 8 miles from the Nevada border, but very rural area. Nevada's in a drought too, and
sure is.
Now it's been raining, and so all this stuff that they've been spraying the last 3 days,
down it comes.
or so, it's all coming down. All this junk and garbage is coming down, and I'll go ahead and take my answer off the air so other people can get through.
All right, I don't see a question there, but more of a statement, Dane, that it's everywhere.
It is, and I would follow up on one thing that Karen said, and when the precipitation does come down and does flush everything into the runoff zones, we are seeing the greatest tree mortality in the riparian areas where even in the drought, the trees have not been without water. We're seeing some of the greatest mortality there.
Yes, that's right. They're dying like crazy.
That's where the greatest accumulation of toxic materials is. So, on the increase in spraying, which we are seeing around the globe, I mean, they're pressing to ever higher levels of overall saturation. The methane cataclysm in the Arctic that's unfolding now is a part of that issue. The military-industrial complex doesn't know how to do anything else but double down again and again and again. No matter how much damage they do, with their mentality, if your head hurts when you're pounding it on the wall, you just have to pound harder. So they're too heavily invested to turn back. They're still doubling down. They're making the methane situation in the Arctic worse, not better. I'd encourage your listeners to search Arctic methane emergency and understand the atmosphere is filling with methane right now. Climate engineering has not mitigated that, but actually made it worse overall. Methane over a 10-year time horizon is 100 times more potent than CO2. It's like covering the planet with a layer of glass. So it's important people look at that issue, understand climate engineering is making it worse, not better.
Can they pinpoint exactly where they want it to rain?
Well, certainly engineering is really a term that's over-dignified for this issue. It creates more of a climate chaos, but do they have a high degree of control? Yes, they absolutely do. And an astounding degree, but yet at the same time, it's like playing weather whack-a-mole. When you push the system in one area, it affects something else somewhere else. So, as the caller just stated, on the dispersion of the rain, very effective. When you over-aerosolize, again, too many CCNs, too many cloud condensation nuclei, the rain disperses. And even a volcano has this effect, George. When Mount Pinatubo blew in 1992, that year, up to that point, because of the particulates put in the air from that one single eruption, made 1992 by 50% the lowest global rainfall year ever recorded to that point. So that's how big an effect it has.
Okay, let's go back to the phones. Tom in the Bronx in New York, east of the Rockies.
Yes,
Tom, hi.
I like to say that we had the terrible snow last year.
You sure did.
And in the East Coast especially, and there was a report that said there was more snow that fell here than in Alaska. Are they channeling these storms to come down here
Yes.
with HARP?
Yes. If you research engineered cool down of eastern U.S., if you search that online, I've done numerous articles on that exact issue. For the last 2 years, based on all global ground temperature readings, the most anomalously cold place below average in the entire world was the eastern half of the U.S. lower 48. Why? Because that's the headlines they wanted, to continue to fuel the division, the confusion, to make it appear that geoengineering is working, to at least to some. And the chemical nucleating materials, it causes an endothermic reaction. That's the chemical reaction that causes the cool down. That can create flash burns on foliage, if you will. And we see also, we had a prime example of an engineered storm in South Dakota on May 4th, 2013, killed 100,000 cattle with temperatures of 40 degrees. Why is it snowing to begin with? And at the same time, this exact same window of time, it was 85 and raining, 85 degrees in Chicago, 90 in Kansas City. How in the world can a snowstorm in Dakota kill 100,000 cattle? Endothermic reacting, heavy, very, very cold to the touch, endothermic reacting, chemically nucleated material. And this is par for the course. So you'll see a lot of that happening again this winter. It's the only way they can drop the temps down significantly right now, and they're using it like there's no tomorrow. And if they continue, there won't be.
What's going to make you stop, Dane? I would say nothing.
Either this insanity being brought to a halt, or I take my last breath, George. One or the other.
Well, you keep going. How old are you?
I'm 53.
You're young enough to keep going.
There's no other choice.
Are there other people like you, though, when, you were mentioning other people are helping you with the billboards, for example? I mean, how much are they pushing this?
Well, there's a few people that are helping a lot. There's a lot of people that I wish were helping more. Again, a lot of people think that, somebody else is moving the ball of the field, so they'll just sit down on the bench again, and we need them to get on the field and start to play. Because if you're a quote-unquote activist, that means doing something and not sitting around waiting for someone else to do it. And quite simply, George, the time horizon we are on right now, and I need everybody to hear this, and even if they don't believe it, they will soon. We are in a very, very short time horizon if we stay on this trajectory. We're through the guardrail. We're going to the bottom of the canyon. Now is when we decide if anything's left of Earth's life support systems. And to put some statistical backing behind that, in the last 40 years, we've lost about two-thirds of Earth's wildlife populations. Two-thirds.
That's huge.
In 40 years. Human population has doubled.
We're killing ourselves.
We are doing exactly that. We're losing 200 to 300 species, plant, animal, and insect a day. 200 to 300 a day. 15,000 times background rate. So, again, for those that are trying to pretend there's nothing wrong and going on about their lives, please face this issue while we still have something left to salvage. Let's
go to Madison, Wisconsin on the wild card line. We've got Phil there. Phil, good morning.
Good morning. It's wonderful that there is a show like yours that's still left in America. I don't know how you're allowed to be on the air because of the great guests that you have. When I was a young fella, I knew Werner Suomi. He was the head of the Department of Meteorology at the University of Wisconsin here in Madison.
Uh-huh.
And I'd visit with him both in his office and his home, and I mentioned to him that there is a heat that is released from the Earth's core that rises up through the phase density layers of the magma, finally reaching the Earth's crust under the oceans and on land, and may contribute to the increase or the lowering of air mass temperatures. And he said, that's a good idea. You should publish that. And I did in 2 small books. I've got them, copyright, everything like that. My question is this. Although I agree with 90% of what you're saying, and it's a great warning to all of us human beings on Earth, my question is, can also the Earth's heat from the core, rising up through these phase density layers in the magma, contribute to the rise of the Earth's air mass temperatures or lowering? Do you agree that that also can contribute to fluctuations in the Earth's air temperatures, as it has when we've had some warm periods like from 600 to 1200 AD, or we've had a very intense cold phase on Earth? What's your answer, kindly, please?
Certainly, that could be a contributing factor. No denying that. But what I'm saying is that when we have a very direct cause and effect that we know is happening, based on Occam's razor, we must look at that effect. So if we could relate this to if you run somebody over in a crosswalk with your truck, you might have a hard time making the argument he died of a heart attack right before you hit him. So
True.
We have a very direct cause and effect right now with what we know is being done to the atmosphere. In fact, the heating, when you saturate the atmosphere with the particulates and then you microwave them, that's what the ionosphere heaters do to create the high pressure zones and to move these particulates around. That's creating heating as well. These signals are bounced off the atmosphere back down into the strata. That creates heating as well. So again, yes, there can be a lot of peripheral contributing factors, but the primary driving force between the alteration and Earth's energy balance, and that's what we're talking about here, Earth's energy balance, the primary factors involved right now are the ones we've been discussing. But I do not deny, of course, don't deny the geologic factors that can play a part of the equation. I'm just saying that the larger driving force right now are the factors that we can mathematically show are the biggest elements, the biggest elephants in the room right now.
And you think the worst element that they put in these sprays, aluminum?
Well, we don't know. We really don't know, because unless you know what you're looking for in a lab, you can't just say test this. You have to tell them what to look for.
There's just too much. You're right.
Well, again, there could be any one of countless elements there, and when we know we have the pharmacology, atmospheric pharmacology going on, which is their term for eliminate one chemical with another chemical, there's no telling what they're putting in the air at this point, George. Absolutely no telling.
All right, Dane, we're going to come back and take some final phone calls with you. Fast night right here on Coast to Coast AM. Well, hard to believe Sinatra would have been 100 years old this December. Wow. That's almost hard to believe. We're going to come back in a moment. We'll take final phone calls here as we talk about geoengineering. And I got to tell you, your calls have been just fantastic. Welcome back. It's our final segment with Dane Wigington as we're talking about geoengineering. And Dane, tell us a little bit about the geoengineeringwatch.org website.
We're simply a resource website, George. We're non-political. We don't sell anything. So we're just trying to provide the materials necessary for people to sound the alarm on this issue, because it's imperative people understand, again, no ozone layer, no life on Earth. No plankton, no life on Earth.
Right.
If we have no resources, for example, the only wealth is truly natural resources. There's a lot of separate scenarios that are pushing us to a point of global total extinction. We're in the sixth great mass extinction now, by the way, statistically. So we're just simply trying to be a resource for people to understand, comprehend, and help to raise awareness on this issue.
Who was the rocket scientist that first developed this idea of geoengineering at Sprain?
Well, we can't really know. Certain people take credit for it, but their time frame is too recent to have been the actual people behind it. So, again, the weather mod situation goes back a long way. Climate modification is just weather modification on a global 24/7 scale. So, too many potential players to really call that one. But again, with the gravity of this issue, the point we try to drive home at Geoengineering Watch is that if every breath you take is laden with this, we have a fight for life, literally. And when our country is run by a criminal cabal that is more than willing to cause climate disaster distractions to keep people from being able to focus on the bigger picture, we may be looking at one of those with Joaquin coming up, another, and certainly in the California drought situation, when people don't have another drop of water to sustain life, they're not going to be able to fight back against the empire very much, are they? So It's important for people to prioritize right now, George. It's truly important because our time horizon on this current trajectory is extremely short, and weather warfare is biological warfare. People need to understand that. When we have to breathe what they're spraying, you can't separate the two. They're two in the same. So the bottom line is this is an issue that should be a top priority for everyone.
Let's go to Justin now in Hollywood, California on the wild card line. Justin, you are up.
Thank you for taking my call, and thank you for having Dane Wigington on regularly.
You.
Excellent show. Dane, thank you for your ongoing commitment to getting this information out.
Thank you, Justin.
I had one question and a comment. The question is, how exactly do these materials break down the ozone layer? And the other point I wanted to make, or question, is if these materials are also holding heat into the atmosphere, have they not done some comparative studies, do you think, in terms of the trade-off? In other words, if they're retaining heat from these materials, this certainly seems to be something that would be apparent to even the geoengineers that are supporting this effort. So the last question I have is in regards to your employment with Bechtel, and I'm just wondering, there are people in the community who are against geoengineering who have a concern about your role with Bechtel before you started this effort, and I'm just wondering if you can explain that, if there should be or should not be any concern about that. I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you very much.
Okay, Justin, go ahead.
I'll back into that question. For those that raised my Bechtel past from 31 years ago, a company that I left because of what I saw at that age, how many people do you know that walk away from a high-paying job?
Not many.
Because of their improprieties when they were 21 years old and never, or 22 years old, and never went back to work for anyone since, ever.
They had a lot of contracts in Saudi Arabia, too, didn't they?
I had the offers to go to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
But I simply did not want it. I saw a lot of good men turn bad. So when people raise that issue, they are simply grabbing at straws. I challenge anybody to cause or prove any kind of impropriety on that sense from 30 or 2 years ago. So back to the other questions. Ozone damage. Particulates in the atmosphere cause ozone damage, period. Doesn't matter whether it's from a volcano or from the back of a jet. Chlorine molecule reaction is part of that process, depletes ozone. That's an effect of all atmospheric particulates, including from a volcano. So you can't not have ozone depletion, and there is a lot of science study on this, so there's no speculation involved. In regards to holding heat, do they know? Yes, they must know, but they're so far in denial. Does the pharmaceutical industry know when it releases a new product that it's going to do far more harm than any perceived good? Certainly they know. At some level they know. But it's simply bad for business. Too many people, too committed, and you have to remember, we have already NOAA stating on the record, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, that these aircraft trails, which you know to be particulate trails, not condensation, are holding in the heat. We know that. So quite simply, we have to remember, these programs are not for the common good. Not for the common good. You have to remember that. They're for power and control, ultimately. And that's the bottom line with weather modification. It is not a benevolent program.
The spider web-looking things in the morning, what are those?
Now, we have certain instances, George, where whole landscapes are covered with filaments. I don't know if you've seen any of that.
Oh, yeah, I have.
We have patents, like the Welsbach patent, stratospheric Welsbach seeding for reduction of global warming this one, a primary climate engineering patent, calls for a polymer fiber to be mixed in the spray dispersion behind the aircraft, mixed with the metallic particles. It's an attempt to mimic the ability of a spider web to stay afloat, a mixing with polymer fibers. And when we see these landscapes littered with these filaments, we believe that's a mechanism malfunction because it happens infrequently. And we have tested some of these filaments, and unless spiders are now making webs out of aluminum, they're not spider webs because we've tested it. So the bottom line is that's what that appears to be.
Syracuse, New York, it's Stephen Stern on Coast to Coast. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, George Norrie. Guess what? I was the person that called you Steve talking with Silberman. I want to unite, have whistleblowers united to save the human species and planet Earth. I want to be the point man.
All right.
I'm not kidding.
You got it. It's your job. Take it away. Just put up a little website, and whistleblowers can go to you anonymously, I guess. That's an interesting take too, Dane. How about anonymous pilots coming on like this program? I'd love to talk to them.
Well, so would I, and I think at some point, George, again, if we could simply reach critical mass of awareness, and we are getting closer, because it's imperative to use the science terms of this issue. I want to drive that point home. And now, because we've stuck to that so tenaciously, now with the recent media coverage that we got from CBS, The Guardian, the National Tribune, and others in the last week alone, they are now starting to use the science figures. Thus, this cause is not marginalized. There is no basis for the chemtrails term. I know it sounds more accurate, and a lot of people want to use it, and I understand that. But if you want to help the cause, we need to stick to the science terms so people understand this is a legitimate issue, and we can't be marginalized by the media. So if we could reach critical mass, we would have a lot of people coming out of the shadows, George, as you spoke, because they know. People in academia know. I've spoken to NOAA scientists face-to-face that have told me to my face, we know about these programs. We're alarmed as hell. We don't know what to do. We have no First Amendment protection. We have to reach critical mass.
It's essential.
It is.
Let's go to Lori, Redding, California, west of the Rockies, of course. Hi, Lori.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'd like to cover maybe 3 little strange bedfellows.
All right.
Media, military, and the faith-based community. I've been living here in Northern California for about 10, 12 years, and I have definitely seen a radical shift very recently of we've had a blackout with local television, local newspaper. It seems like a lot of these people are just interested in their pension and paycheck. They'll do the nightly weather report saying it's partly cloudy or it's partly sunny. How vague can you be, right? Anyway, so I think a lot of us have been fortunate. George, thank you for your way of covering alternative, because the usual mainstream media has just been abhorrent. I have a friend in the UK, Steve, who helped a friend here locally with 3,000 pictures of these trails. Can you imagine taking 3,000 pictures
God.
and then assemble it on his own time into an 11-minute slideshow? So I just want to put that out to the people that are helping advocate and promote media, George, that you keep
Very good.
putting out there. And I know Dane actually has a show weekly, Global Alert News, Saturday mornings, 1 hour, commercial-free. Again, it's just, you don't get this on CNN and Fox, and I've stopped television for 6 or 7 years. So let's go to the next bedfellow, military. About a month ago, we had an event here in Northern California, and we had Mario Ramirez from Fresno, a Navy vet, who was sharing deeply, fully about his exposure to, depleted uranium, and just his whole whistleblowing is all I can say in a short moment. And I think Dane was also talking about how, and I'm going to be super vegetarian, or I'm going to be a breatharian real quick, because I don't think we're going to have much left, Dane. I don't know. But when you eat large fish, those fish have eaten other fish that are smaller. And if you're going from radioactive and toxicity, why would we do that? That just makes no sense. It's not a way to live. My last comment, and I'll let you go, is faith-based. We have a local church all ready to promote the LBGT population, transgender, marriage, and to some extent, this is very important. I'm a clinician therapist, but when we're looking at life support, this has got to just take a moment, and we've got to redefine our priorities, because this is, again, back to massive distractions, the politics, whatever's on the news of the day to make us bicker, fight, and complain. So if, Dane, you want to share anything that seems to strike you as pertinent, I will love to hear about it.
George, on the reactions or the participation, or lack of participation, I should say, from the environmentalist community is appalling, absolutely appalling. The hypocrisy is mind-boggling. So when you have organizations like Bill McGibbon with 350.org, huge environmental organization, receiving money from the Rockefeller Foundation, and in talking about only the anthropogenic addition to carbon and not mentioning climate engineering, this is the epitome of hypocrisy. You can't have a legitimate discussion about the climate without discussing climate engineering first. So we have environmental groups that are bought, sold, paid for. They care only about their 501c3 nonprofits.
Yeah.
They're not addressing this issue. And unfortunately, the same seems to be true with many of the faith-based organizations. They simply don't want to rock the boat and risk their 501s. That is the epitome of hypocrisy as well. I hope that changes. Everybody needs to join this fight, but that's exactly what we have going on in those two camps.
We've got Leonard in Connecticut now. Hi, Leonard. Thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Hey, George. How are you?
Good, sir. Good.
I've been listening to it for years, trying to get through, and there's one time I flick you on, you hear this gentleman, Dane, say, first of all, I'm a studying geologist and kind of a weather fanatic as a hobby.
Perfect.
I hear this man say, Hurricane Sandy making a beeline left. Do you know how many people I try and point that out to? They say, you're nuts. Nuts. Let me tell you something. Hurricanes don't go against the jet stream. Okay? And you look at the last 100 years of records, you'll find every hurricane starts, goes up the coast, out to sea. You show me one hurricane that stopped.
And
stopped,
turned.
Literally.
Yeah.
Full agreement.
And
how would they know that 7 days ahead of time? And we may be in for another one of those rounds coming up.
I tell you, I experienced the first one, and I now have a big generator in my house, and it carried houses away here. I'm on the shore. It carried houses into the ocean.
That's an example of weather warfare, plain and simple. And for those who wonder why would they carry this out on the American population, you have to remember, we're not a country with a government. We have a government that owns a country. It's a criminal cabal that runs a country. They're not here for our benefit. There's nothing benevolent in these programs. And when they need to send a message as to how much power they have and how much power they wield, that's the kind of example we'll get. Just like Cyclone Haiyan that cut a swath through the Philippines, intensified anomalously before it struck the Philippines. The U.S. moves in under humanitarian pretext, starts to set up bases. This is a very, very set pattern. Same thing in Thailand. Thailand refused the U.S. an air base in 2011 for weather modification. They immediately got slaughtered with record flooding. Anybody who doesn't comply gets the hammer dropped.
Let's go to Brian, truck driving in Wisconsin now, east of the Rockies. Brian, you are up with us.
Hey, guys, thanks. I just had a quick comment and then question. It is amazing how when you try and point these trails out to people just laugh at you. The most recent example was one day we were driving, a couple of friends were in the car. There was such a thick trail, I don't know if they didn't mix it properly, they're spraying too heavily. You could see little streamers coming off of the trail. And the friends just laughed, and it's just like, it's so obvious, and people can't wrap their minds around it, and I guess my question was, is there any sort of supplement or vitamin we can take to kind of counteract the effects of all the aluminum and the other chemicals that are in the spray? I'll take my answer off the phone. Thank you.
That's interesting. That's probably a great question for Dr. Joel Wallach or Peter Glidden the next time they're on the program. I don't know, Dane, do you know?
Well, yeah, I can give them enough advice to go on. Constant chelation is essential, absolutely essential, to keep these metals moving through your system. Go to your local health food store, talk to nutritionalists, have them put you on a standard chelation diet, heavy metal chelation. A lot of natural products can do this, even vitamin C, cilantro. Just constantly chelate, keep them moving through your system, a lot of fresh water. And important to remember with these metals, George, they're bioavailable. They are absorbed by everything.
Yeah.
That means our crops, right. There is no organic at this point. And on the effects of the weather cataclysms being created, affecting crops and so forth, Mongolia just lost 80% of their crops. 80%.
Oh, they're wiped out.
Wiped out. California is about wiped out. And our forest is absolutely silent here where I live next to Lake Shasta. Dead, dying trees everywhere. That's the kind of power they wield. We are on a very short time horizon. If we don't deal with this issue, truly, there will be not much left to save very soon. That's why we desperately need people to investigate and join us in this battle.
Let's go to Willie, truck driving in Bakersfield, California, first-time caller. Willie, let's squeeze you in. Go ahead.
Hey, George. Good evening.
Hi.
Hey, I live here in California, and I drive truck, and I just drive up and down Highway 99, Stockton to San Bernardino. I noticed the chemtrails out to the west. Tons of them. Now, a month ago, when California went on fire, all the fires, I see nothing. was wondering if Dane had noticed that.
I'm not the exact area or window you might have been in. I don't deny that you didn't see any, but we saw quite substantial spraying even above the fires while they were going on.
Wow!
And that generates even more heat. Now we have a report from a U.S. Forest Service fighter that said FEMA helicopters landed and his groups, U.S. Forest Service, were broken into 4 groups, and they were told about the incendiary effect of the aerosol spraying. We're trying to get at one of those people that was at that meeting. They were apparently given some sort of manual with that. We're trying to dig up that data, but I think this elephant is not fitting under the rug much longer. So you might see a window here and there, but the overall global spraying is increasing quite substantially. And don't look for just the horizon-to-horizon trails. The shorter, bright trails are also generally spray dispersions. Examine the high bypass turbofan tutorial on the homepage of Geoengineering Watch to make clear the mechanics of that engine, that we should not be seeing anything coming out of it.
They spray during the day or nighttime?
They'll spray both. When we see night spraying, typically, George, is when they're trying to build a high-pressure dome to actually create heat to build the high-pressure dome to help steer the jet stream. We actually, on those occasions, can see spraying at night. During other occasions, you might see every aircraft leaving a horizon-to-horizon trail during the day, and at night you'll see nothing coming out of the aircraft. On those days, they're letting the radiant heat return, it appears.
Dane, thanks for being on the show. Your website, geoengineeringwatch.org.